I'm afraid this store is not for you.
What is the meaning of this?
Before we begin, I'd like to ask you for a small favor. I'm really hoping to break through the magical barrier of 1,000 subscribers. That number holds a special significance for me. Hit that subscribe button. It's just one click, but for me, it's a huge boost of motivation to create my next video. Thank you in advance. Get out of the store, right now. They threw her out of the jewelry store because of her clothes. Nobody knew her millionaire son owned the whole place. Get out of here. A woman like you has no business in a place like this. Those words echoed among the glass display cases, amidst the diamond necklaces and gold watches, among the employees pretending not to hear, and the customers who did. They reverberated with such a clean, self-assured cruelty that for a moment, no one dared to breathe. Doña Carmen Villanueva was 75 years old, her hands calloused from a lifetime of work, and her dignity intact, the dignity of someone who had never asked anyone for anything. She wore her best cardigan, a beige hand-knitted wool with a small patch on the right elbow that she considered invisible. A floral skirt washed so many times the colors had decided to surrender, and pointed-toe black shoes that no longer remembered when they had been new. She carried a small, brown leather bag with a worn strap. Inside, she held the most valuable thing she possessed at that moment, 5,000 pesos in cash, saved over 4 months, kept in a carefully folded envelope. She had entered elite jewelry with slow but sure steps, like someone entering a place they had every right in the world to be. And she did. Anyone has the right to enter a store. But Rodrigo Salcedo didn't think so. Rodrigo was the manager of the Lomas de Chapultepec branch of Elite Jewelry, the most exclusive jewelry chain in the country. He was 45 years old, wore a tailored black suit, an Egyptian cotton white shirt, a dark tie with a platinum pin, and the kind of arrogance that only develops in those who confuse other people's money with their own. He was thin, his hair perfectly slicked back with gel, and he had a gaze trained to categorize people in 2 seconds, those who buy and those who don't. Doña Carmen entered through the revolving glass door at 11:15 on a Tuesday morning. The morning was bright. The Mexico City sun streamed through the large windows, making every gemstone in the display cases sparkle, like tiny stars trapped in glass. There were 4 employees on the sales floor, Lucia, Fernanda, Marco, and Tomas, and 3 customers, a young couple looking at engagement rings in the back, and a middle-aged woman examining bracelets near the register. No one paid attention to the elderly woman when she entered. She walked slowly, looking at the display cases, carefully, without touching anything. She was looking for something special. In 3 days, it would be her son's birthday, her only son, the one who called her every Sunday without fail, who sent her money every month, though she always refused it, the one who told her every time they saw each other that she was the most important woman in his life. This year, for the first time, Carmen had decided to give him a real gift, something from a jewelry store, something he could wear and that would remind him that his mother loved him. 4 months saving 5,000 pesos. She approached the central display case, where there were cufflinks, silver and gold studs. They seemed elegant, discreet, perfect for a serious man. "Excuse me, young man," she said to Fernanda, who was passing by with a tablet in her hand. "Could you show me those silver cufflinks? The ones in the center, please." Fernanda glanced at the elderly woman, assessed her in exactly 1.5 seconds, then looked toward the back of the store with an expression that wasn't exactly indifference, but not kindness either. "I'll be with you in a moment," she replied without stopping. Carmen waited. 3 minutes passed. Fernanda didn't return. She waited 5 more minutes. Then she approached the display case again and looked at the cufflinks from outside the glass, trying to see the price. That's when Rodrigo Salcedo saw her. What he saw wasn't a woman. He saw an old cardigan, a worn bag, and unbranded shoes. What he saw was a potential problem for his store's image. What he calculated in that instant was that this woman wouldn't buy anything, that she was out of place, and that it was his duty, as manager, as guardian of Elite Jewelry's standards, to let her know. He adjusted his tie pin, walked toward her with a firm step. "Madam," he said, with that soft voice cruel men use when they still want to appear polite. "Can I help you with something?" Carmen looked up and smiled. "Yes, thank you very much. I want to see those silver cufflinks. They're for my son. It's his birthday." Rodrigo looked at the cufflinks. They were one of the least expensive pieces in the display, 2,800 pesos for the pair. Then he looked Carmen up and down, slowly, without any pretense. The bag, the cardigan, the shoes. "Madam," he said, and this time his voice was no longer soft. "Those cufflinks have a price that perhaps doesn't correspond to what you're looking for. Perhaps in another establishment you can find something more in line with your means." Point. The silence was brief but absolute. Carmen blinked, smiled again, this time with patience. "Don't worry, young man. I have money, I just want to see them." Rodrigo's jaw tightened. "It's not a matter of money, madam. It's a matter of this type of establishment having a specific clientele profile, and I have an obligation to ensure an exclusive experience for our regular customers." "I want to buy," Carmen repeated, still not understanding what was happening. "This is not your place," Rodrigo said then, in a clear, cold voice, loud enough for all 4 employees and the 3 customers to hear. "I ask you to leave." The young couple in the back stopped looking at the rings. The woman with the bracelets turned her head. Lucia and Tomas exchanged a glance. Carmen remained still, not out of stubbornness, but because she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Sir," she said slowly, "I came in to buy. I have money. I just want to see the silver cufflinks for my son." That's when Rodrigo lost the little tact he had left. "I told you to leave," he raised his voice, and at the same time extended his arm and grabbed Carmen by the elbow firmly, pulling her slightly toward the exit. "A woman like you has no business in a place like this. Get out of here." The envelope with the 5,000 pesos fell from Carmen's bag and burst open when it hit the marble floor. The bills scattered, red and green, against the pristine white of the floor. No one bent down to pick them up. Carmen looked at the bills, then at Rodrigo, then at the employees who lowered their eyes, at the young couple who had frozen, at the woman with the bracelets who was pressing her lips together. She didn't cry. Carmen Villanueva had buried a husband. She had raised a son alone. She had washed other people's clothes. She had sold tamales in the pre-dawn hours and had sewn until the light ran out to pay the rent. She wasn't one to cry in public. She bent down slowly. Her knees ached as always, and she picked up her bills one by one with hands that didn't tremble. She folded them, put them back in the envelope. She put the envelope in her bag and stood up. She looked Rodrigo in the eye. "May God bless you, young man," she said softly, and walked toward the door. It was at that precise moment, when Carmen was 4 steps from the exit, and Rodrigo still had that look of satisfaction on his face that cowards have when they win, that the revolving glass door moved, and someone entered. A young man, 35 years old, a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, white shirt, black tie, dark sunglasses, polished leather shoes, and on his wrist, a watch worth more than the entire visible inventory of the store. He took 2 steps inside and stopped, because what he saw stopped him. He saw an elderly woman in a patched beige cardigan walking toward him, her eyes fixed on the floor, carrying a small bag with her hands clenched, and he recognized her. It was his mother. Alejandro Villanueva was not a man who easily lost his composure. He had presided over board meetings with losses of 100 million pesos without changing his expression. He had signed multi-million-dollar acquisition contracts with the same calm as signing a supermarket receipt. He had survived bankruptcies, betrayals by partners, financial crises, and a global pandemic without anyone seeing him break a sweat. He had that strange serenity of men who have been to the bottom and climbed out on their own, and who know, because they lived it, that nothing external has real power over them. But when he saw his mother walking toward the exit, with her eyes downcast and her lips pressed together, something broke. No, outwardly, Alejandro didn't shout, didn't run, didn't make any dramatic gestures. On the outside, he remained the same man in the navy blue suit with the $40,000 watch. But inside, in that place where the things a son can never explain to anyone reside, something shattered with a sound only he heard. "Mom?" The voice was soft, almost a whisper. Carmen looked up when she saw Alejandro standing at the threshold of the revolving door, his dark glasses still on, and that posture identical to his father's when he was young. Her expression didn't change suddenly. It shifted like the sky before it rains, a very gradual, almost imperceptible thing, until suddenly everything was different. "My son," she said, and in that single word was everything. Relief, shame that wasn't hers but that she felt, and love that needs no adornment to exist. Alejandro took off his glasses, walked toward her, took her by the shoulders carefully, always carefully, because he knew her bones had been aching for years and she never said it. and examined her as if looking for marks. "Are you okay?" he asked. I'm fine, Carmen replied, waving a hand in the air like someone shooing away flies. "Nothing happened, my son. Let's go." "Nothing happened," Alejandro repeated. It wasn't a question. It was a statement he needed to process. He looked inside the store. His eyes swept over the employees, the customers, the illuminated glass display cases, until they found Rodrigo Salcedo, who was still standing in the center of the sales floor, with that satisfied posture of a man who still didn't understand what was about to happen to him. Rodrigo saw the newcomer. He assessed him with the same mental radar he used for everything. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive shoes, VIP client. He automatically smiled and took 2 steps forward with his hand extended in that corporate welcome gesture he activated like a reflex whenever he detected money. "Welcome to Elite Jewelry, sir. It's a pleasure to have you with us. If you like, I can personally attend to you and show you." "You're the manager," Alejandro interrupted him. His voice was still calm. That was what made it unsettling. Rodrigo blinked. He wasn't used to being interrupted. "That's right. Rodrigo Salcedo, manager of this branch. How can I help you? What did you say to this woman?" Silence. Rodrigo looked at Carmen, then at the man in the suit, then back at Carmen. His brain began to construct an explanation, a justification, a narrative, in which he was the professional, maintaining the store's standards, and the elderly woman was simply someone out of place. "Look, sir, I understand that perhaps it seems. I asked what you said to this woman." Rodrigo swallowed. "I indicated with all due respect that this establishment has a specific clientele profile and that perhaps her needs could be better met elsewhere." "Did you touch her?" Another pause. Fernanda, from behind the counter, closed her eyes for a second. Tomas discreetly moved toward the back. Lucia stood frozen like a statue. "Sir, I simply—" "What did you say to this woman?" The third time he asked the question, it no longer had question marks. It was a declaration awaiting confirmation. Rodrigo shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The situation demanded, "Answer me." I took her by the arm to guide her towards the exit, to usher her out, to point her towards the door. Yes, because of how she was dressed. It wasn't a question either. Rodrigo pursed his lips. The control of the conversation had slipped through his fingers, without him being able to pinpoint the exact moment it happened. He tried to regain it. "Sir, with all due respect, this is neither the time nor the place." "This is precisely the place," Alejandro said. "And you have all my time." He turned to his mother. "Mom, please sit here for a moment." He took one of the velvet chairs from beside the main display case, the very chairs usually reserved for VIP clients, sipping champagne as they selected jewelry, and placed it in front of Carmen. She looked at him with that expression she had when she wanted to tell him he was exaggerating but couldn't find the right moment. "My son, really, it's not that serious. Sit down, Mom." Carmen sat. Alejandro turned back to Rodrigo. "My name is Alejandro Villanueva." He said it, as one might state a date or an address, without emphasis, without drama. Rodrigo processed the name. Something in his memory stirred, something small, distant, like an alarm sounding in a 100-story building, its sound muffled by the time it reached the first floor. "I am the owner," Alejandro continued, "of Grupo Villanueva Capital, which is, as you may or may not know, the company that acquired Elite Jewelry 3 years ago, along with its 22 branches nationwide, its warehouses, its digital platform, and all its personnel contracts." The color drained from Rodrigo's face, not all at once. It happened exactly as the sky had changed on Carmen's face a moment before. Gradual, inexorable, until nothing remained. "Which means," Alejandro went on, his voice just as calm, his expression just as unadorned, "that you work for me, and the lady you just threw out of this store because you didn't like how she was dressed is my mother." The young couple in the back no longer pretended to look at rings. They watched the scene with wide eyes, their phones put away, because there are moments when you feel that to record them would be to diminish them. The woman with the bracelets had her hand to her mouth. Fernanda stared at the floor, Tomas at the wall. Lucia looked at Rodrigo with an expression that, in any other context, would have been a mixture of something akin to pity. Marco, the 4th employee, had discreetly slipped out to the stockroom 2 minutes earlier and still hadn't returned. Rodrigo opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Mr. Villanueva, I had no way of knowing." You had a way of knowing she was a human being who entered your store to make a purchase. Yes, but I had no way of knowing she had money in that bag. You couldn't. Did you have a way of knowing you had no right to take her by the arm? Each question was a step, and each of Rodrigo's answers was a step downward. Sir, in the context of the situation, I acted according to store protocols that stipulate, show me that protocol. Silence. Show me the internal document from Elite Jewelry that states you can escort a 75-year-old customer out by taking her by the arm because you don't like how she's dressed. Rodrigo said nothing, because that document didn't exist. Rodrigo knew it, and now Alejandro knew it, in front of everyone. It was Carmen who broke the silence. My son, she said from her chair, in that soft voice she had always used to calm storms. The gentleman didn't know. Leave it. Come on. Let's go have breakfast. Alejandro looked at his mother, and something in his chest, that unbreakable, eternal thing that is a son's love, tightened painfully, because it had always been this way. This was Carmen Villanueva. When the landlord threatened eviction, she offered him coffee. When the neighbor insulted her for hanging laundry in the wrong yard, she brought her tamales the next day. When life hit her, and it hit her hard, many times, without warning, she always found a way to say, leave it, it's nothing, let's go. It had been that capacity for letting go that had kept her whole for 75 years. But this time, Alejandro wasn't going to let go. Not now, Mom, he said softly. He turned to Rodrigo. I need you to call Corporate Human Resources immediately and tell them Mr. Villanueva is at the Lomas branch and requires an urgent call. Rodrigo's lips were white. Mr. Villanueva, please, if you'll give me a chance to explain. Make the call, Mr. Salcedo. Rodrigo pulled out his phone with hands that were no longer entirely steady, and in that instant, no one in that jewelry store, not the employees, not the customers, not Rodrigo himself, had the slightest doubt about what was about to happen. The sun continued to stream through the windows, the diamonds in the display cases continued to sparkle, and Doña Carmen, seated in the velvet chair that was normally for the store's most important clients, adjusted her beige cardigan with the elbow patch and waited with the same infinite patience she had always waited for life to do what it had to do. The call lasted 4 minutes. Rodrigo spoke in a low voice, his back to everyone, pressed against the wall near the cash register. Those nearby could catch fragments. Yes, Mr. Villanueva, in person. No, here at the store. I didn't know what... His voice cracked at the edges like damp paper. When he hung up, it took him 3 seconds to turn around. Those 3 seconds were enough for him to realize there was no possible escape that would leave him looking good. He turned. Alejandro stood waiting, arms crossed, in the exact center of the sales floor. He hadn't changed his posture in the last 6 minutes. He hadn't checked his phone, hadn't looked at his watch. He had that kind of patience that isn't passivity, but absolute control, the kind possessed by someone who knows time works for them. Did you speak to anyone? He asked. With the Director of Human Resources, Licenciada Montoya. She said she is available whenever you wish to call her. Good. Alejandro nodded. Now I want you to do something else, Mr. Salcedo. Rodrigo waited. I want you to stand here, in front of my mother. He indicated the space a meter from the chair where Carmen was still seated. And I want you to tell her, in your own words, exactly what you told her 10 minutes ago. In front of everyone, the ensuing silence was so dense it seemed to have weight. Rodrigo blinked. Mr. Villanueva, I believe the most productive thing at this point would be, I didn't ask you what you think is productive. I asked you to repeat what you said. It's just that in context, my words could be misinterpreted. Your words were already spoken in front of 4 employees and 3 customers. The context already exists. I just want those who are here to hear from your mouth what you considered appropriate to say to a 75-year-old lady who came in to shop. Fernanda's eyes were fixed on her tablet screen, though she wasn't reading anything. Tomas had returned from the back and was now staring at a fixed point on the wall, as if he had discovered something fascinating in the stucco finish. Lucia was the only one looking directly at the scene with the expression of someone watching a traffic accident, horrified, but unable to look away. The young couple in the back had taken 2 steps forward without realizing it. The woman with the bracelets still had her hand near her mouth. Rodrigo looked at Carmen. Carmen looked at him, without visible resentment, without triumph, with that serene gaze of people who have seen enough of life to know that difficult moments also pass. Rodrigo opened his mouth. I told her that this establishment has a specific client profile, he began, searching for the most softened version of his own words. and that perhaps her needs could be better attended to elsewhere. And? Alejandro prompted. And I asked her to leave. How did you ask her? A pause. I indicated the exit. In what tone? In a direct tone. You touched her. Rodrigo closed his eyes for a second. To guide her? To guide her? Or to throw her out? Silence was the answer. It was Carmen who spoke. He pulled me by the elbow, she said, with the same calm she might have used to say, It's cloudy today. And the bag fell. The bills scattered. No one said anything. Alejandro looked at his mother, then looked at Rodrigo, and for the first time in the entire conversation, his expression changed, though only for an instant. Something flickered across his eyes that wasn't exactly anger. It was something older and deeper, something that has to do with seeing the person you love most suffer and knowing you couldn't prevent it. He controlled it, put it away, and continued. Why? He asked Rodrigo. I want you to explain to me why you made that decision. Not the protocol, not the standards. Why? Rodrigo took time to answer, because I considered that her presence did not correspond to the establishment's profile. Based on what? Her appearance? Her clothes? Yes. Her age? No. Her clothes. Then, nothing else. Yes. Alejandro nodded slowly. I want you to understand something, Mr. Salcedo. He took a step closer. This lady, whom you judged by her clothes, washed other people's clothes for 15 years to pay the rent for a rooftop room where she raised me. She sold tamales in the early morning to buy me school books. She sewed other people's uniforms until 2 in the morning so I could continue in school. With those hands, he gestured to Carmen's hands, his eyes never leaving Rodrigo's. With those hands that you deemed insufficient to enter your store, she built everything that I am. No one moved. And she came here today, Alejandro continued, with 5,000 pesos she had saved for 4 months because she wanted to buy me a birthday gift. A gift I didn't ask for, that no one asked for, that she decided to give me because that's who she is. And you threw her out in front of everyone, taking her by the arm. Rodrigo's eyes were red. He wasn't crying, but he was close. Mr. Villanueva, I'm sorry. I truly am. If I had known, therein lies the problem, Alejandro interrupted. Your regret arrived when you knew who I am, not when you realized what you did to her. That sentence fell into the silence like a stone into still water. The young couple in the back exchanged a look. The young man took his girlfriend's hand without realizing it. The woman with the bracelets lowered her hand from her mouth. Her eyes were bright. Fernanda had put her tablet on the counter and was looking directly at Alejandro with an expression that was no longer indifferent. If my mother had walked in wearing a Chanel suit and an Hermès bag, Alejandro said, would you have thrown her out? Rodrigo didn't answer. He couldn't. Of course not, Alejandro answered for him. Because then she would have passed the filter. Not of money, Mr. Salcedo, but of appearance. You don't detect customers, you detect disguises. Carmen made a small sound. It wasn't exactly laughter. It was that involuntary sound that escapes when something surprises you, even if you don't want to show it. Alejandro glanced at her, and for an instant, just an instant, something softened on his face. Then he looked back at Rodrigo. There is something I want you to do now, before this continues. Rodrigo waited, rigid. I want you to apologize to my mother, not to me, to her. Looking her in the eyes. Rodrigo turned toward Carmen. He hesitated. Then he walked the 3 steps that separated him from the chair, stopped in front of her, looked at her, and in that moment, facing that elderly woman with the patched cardigan and the small bag on her lap, Rodrigo Salcedo, branch manager, man of tailored suits and platinum tie clips, was left without any of the words he normally used. Ma'am, he said finally, what I did was wrong. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. I shouldn't have touched you. I'm sorry. Carmen looked at him for a moment. I already forgive you, she said, before he had even finished. And that, in a way, was the most devastating thing of all. Rodrigo blinked. Something in his face shifted in a way that was nameless, yet instantly recognizable to everyone in the store. Alejandro watched the scene unfold without a word. Then he pulled his phone from his pocket, dialed a number, and waited through 2 rings. Good morning, Licenciada Montoya. Yes, it's me. I'm at Lomas. I'm going to need you to send over the complete file for Mr. Rodrigo Salcedo. Yes, just a moment. I'll also need someone from legal to be available this afternoon. Thank you. He hung up. He looked at Rodrigo. Stay in the store. Do not leave. We'll continue this conversation in a few minutes. Rodrigo nodded. He was voiceless. Alejandro walked over to his mother, crouched in front of her chair, his navy blue suit and $40,000 watch a stark presence before her, and looked her in the eye. "Are you really okay?" Carmen raised a hand and adjusted the collar of his shirt with 2 fingers, just as she had always done since he was 4. "I'm fine, my son. I'm always fine. I swear to you." "I know," she interrupted him. "I know. You don't have to swear anything," and she placed her hand on his cheek. "1 second, just 1 second." Alejandro closed his eyes. Behind the jewelry store was a back room, a small space with a conference table, 4 office chairs, a cabinet filled with supplier catalogs, and a coffee maker that was always on. It was the place where Rodrigo held his Monday team meetings, reviewed sales reports, and where he sometimes ate lunch alone in front of his laptop screen. That afternoon, the room smelled of coffee and fear. Alejandro entered first, then Carmen, who accepted the armchair he offered and let out a small sigh of relief as she sat, her knees protesting every hour she'd spent standing. Then Rodrigo entered, closing the door carefully, as if the force with which he closed it could somehow affect the outcome of what was to come. On the table were 3 cups of coffee that Lucia had prepared without being asked. It was the kind of instinctive gesture people make when they don't know what else to do. Alejandro didn't touch the coffee. Neither did Rodrigo. Carmen picked up her cup with both hands and took a sip before anyone spoke. "Well," Alejandro said, "tell me about yourself, Mr. Salcedo." Rodrigo looked at him, unsure of the ground. "What do you mean? How long have you been with the company? How did you get to this position? What results have you achieved?" It was an HR question. Rodrigo recognized its format but didn't understand its purpose in this context. Nevertheless, he answered, "I've been at Elite Jewelry for 8 years. I started as a sales associate at the Polanco branch. I worked my way up. 3 years ago, I was appointed manager of Lomas, before the acquisition. Yes, before the Villanueva Group bought the chain and its numbers." Rodrigo shifted slightly. This was familiar territory. This branch has met its targets for the last 16 consecutive months. We have the highest average ticket price of all branches in Mexico City. Last year, we were recognized as the best branch for customer experience nationwide. "Customer experience," Alejandro repeated. The echo of those words did what it needed to do. Rodrigo felt the ground shift beneath his feet again. "That was before today," he said quietly. "What changed today?" "I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Alejandro nodded. "How would you specifically define that mistake?" Rodrigo looked at Carmen, who held her cup, watching him without pressure, as if the conversation were about the weather. "I judged a person by their appearance, and treated them in a way that does not align with the company's values or any basic standard of dignity. I made her feel she had no right to be here, and that was wrong." "Did you think that at the time?" A long pause. "No. What did you think at the time?" Rodrigo hesitated. Then he answered with an honesty that seemed to physically cost him. "I thought it was a problem, that her presence didn't fit with the type of client who frequents this branch. I thought if I let her stay and she didn't buy anything, other customers might be uncomfortable. I thought it was my job to maintain a certain image for the place. And the image of the place is above the treatment of people. It shouldn't be, but in practice, for you, it was." Rodrigo didn't reply. It wasn't necessary. Alejandro picked up his coffee cup for the first time, took a sip, and set it back on the table. "Mr. Salcedo, I'm going to be direct with you, because I believe what's happening here deserves clarity. No beating around the bush. What you did this morning has consequences. Not because my mother is my mother, but because what you did to her, you could have done to anyone. And if you did it to her in front of witnesses without any shame, it's because it wasn't the first time you've thought that way. Perhaps the first time you acted so directly, but the thought didn't originate today." Rodrigo didn't deny it. "What that means," Alejandro continued, "is that there's a deeper problem that a single incident doesn't explain, and that I, as the owner, have a responsibility to address. Not just in this branch, but in all of them." Carmen placed her cup on the table. "My son," she said. "May I say something?" Alejandro looked at her. "Of course, Mom." Carmen turned to Rodrigo, looking at him with that disconcerting calm that he had already learned to fear more than anger. "Do you have a mother, Mr. Salcedo?" Rodrigo blinked at the sudden shift. "Yes, ma'am. She's 72 years old." "Is she alive?" "Yes." "That's good," Carmen said. "And she meant it. Then you know what it's like to love someone like that." She gestured toward Alejandro with her head. "What that young man is feeling right now, you know it. Not because he's rich or because he's the owner, but because he's a son. Do you understand? Rodrigo nodded. His eyes were glassy. I don't hold a grudge, Carmen continued. I told you outside, and I'll repeat it here, but I do want you to understand something, because I think it's important that you truly understand it, and not just because it's convenient to say yes. Tell me, ma'am, Rodrigo said. When you saw me enter, you had already decided who I was, without asking me anything. Without listening to me, you just looked at me, and you knew everything you needed to know. She paused. That's how we are treated, the elderly, in many places, sir. As if we're already past our prime. As if having lived a long life is a disgrace instead of a merit. And one gets used to it. That's the sad part. That one ends up getting used to it. No one spoke. I didn't come here to be given anything, Carmen continued. I came to buy with my own money, which I worked hard for over months, and all I wanted was to see some silver cufflinks for my son, because his birthday is in 3 days, and I wanted to give him something beautiful with my own hands. Rodrigo closed his eyes. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said. And this time, it didn't sound like a platitude. It sounded like something that came from deeper within. I'm truly sorry, Carmen nodded. I know, Alejandro said. He had listened to everything in silence. Now he leaned back in his chair and looked at Rodrigo for several seconds without saying anything. I want you to know, he finally said, that the decision I'm about to make, I didn't make it before hearing you. I made it now, with everything you've said. Rodrigo waited. I'm not going to ask you to leave today. What I will do is initiate a formal process. Licenciada Montoya will contact you this afternoon. There will be an investigation into the procedures of this branch, and depending on the outcome, a decision will be made about your continued employment. Rodrigo nodded slowly. May I ask something? He said. Go ahead. If my mother had been in that situation, if someone had done the same thing to her, would you have acted differently than I did? He cleared his throat. It was a strange, almost suicidal question, given the context, but there was something genuine about it. Alejandro took a moment to respond. I don't know, he finally said. I hope so, but I don't know. What I do know is that there's a difference between making a mistake and being built to make one. And what I want to find out with the investigation is which of those two cases you fall into. Rodrigo nodded again, then looked at Carmen. Mrs. Villanueva, would you do me the honor of letting me show you the cufflinks you came to see? Carmen looked at him, then thought for a second. Not right now, my son, he said, with something that wasn't exactly a smile, but it was close. Is going to take me to breakfast now, but I'll come another day. Rodrigo nodded. Whenever you wish, we'll be waiting. The three of them left the back room. On the sales floor, the 4 employees pretended to be busy with different tasks, but it was evident they had been waiting. The young couple was gone. The woman with the bracelets was also gone, but there were 2 new customers who had entered in the meantime and were looking at the displays without knowing what had just happened in that place. Alejandro helped his mother put on the cardigan she had taken off inside because it was warm in the back room, adjusted her collar. She checked the knot of his tie, even though it was perfect. They walked together towards the door. Before leaving, Alejandro paused. He turned to Fernanda, who was closest. What's her name? Fernanda, sir. Fernanda. This lady will be back in the next few days. When she arrives, I want you to receive her personally, offer her a seat, show her everything she wants to see, without rushing. Understood? Fernanda nodded with a speed that bordered on reflex. Of course, Mr. Villanueva. Thank you. They went out. The Mexico City sun greeted him outside, with that midday light that flattens shadows and makes the asphalt gleam. Alejandro walked beside his mother, on the sidewalk, at her slow pace, without hurrying. Where do you want to go? He asked. Carmen thought, is there anywhere around here that serves good chilaquiles? Alejandro smiled, the first real smile of the entire morning. There's one 3 blocks away, with green sauce. With green sauce? All right, Carmen said, and took a step forward. But I'm treating. The restaurant was called La Paloma, and was nothing extraordinary. Red and white checkered tablecloths, wooden chairs with worn varnish, a ceiling fan turning slowly, doing little for the heat, and a scent of epazote and toasted chili, which was a welcome in itself. There were 4 tables occupied when they entered, 2 families, a man alone with his newspaper folded next to his plate, and an elderly couple sharing an orange soda with 2 straws. The waiter, a young man no older than 17, with a green apron and a scowl, saw them enter and gestured to a table by the window without a word. Alejandro helped his mother sit. She reviewed the laminated menu with the same seriousness with which he reviewed quarterly financial statements. Chilaquiles verdes with chicken, she said without hesitation before the waiter finished handing out the menus. For me too, Alejandro said. How do you want them? The young man asked. Very sauced, Carmen said. Don't leave them dry. Very sauced, the waiter repeated, and wrote it down with a seriousness that suggested he understood the importance of the instruction. They were left alone. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, through the window, Mexico City passed by with its usual noise. A truck, a horn, two women with market bags, a dog crossing the street diagonally with the authority of someone who knows the traffic light timings better than anyone. Carmen adjusted the salt shaker, aligned the cutlery, folded the paper napkin into a triangle, just as she had always done, at every table in every place they had gone together since Alejandro could remember. Stop arranging the table, Mom, he said. Let me arrange it, she replied. Alejandro smiled. Then the smile faded on its own. Why didn't you tell me you were going today? Carmen looked up. What for? So I could take you and pay and choose. I didn't want to go alone. I wanted to buy you something. I know, Mom. But if you had told me, if I had told you, it wouldn't have made any difference. She interrupted him patiently. Because the gift isn't the jewelry, my son. The gift is that I went to get it for you. That I saved, that I walked into that store alone to ask for it. That's what I wanted to give you. The other is merely the wrapping. Alejandro looked at her. There were moments, increasingly frequent as the years passed, when his mother would say something with such simplicity and such accuracy that he felt all his years of university, all his books on management and business strategy, all the MBAs and business conferences in the world, hadn't taught him half of what she knew. And the money? He asked. 4 months, Mom. Where did you save it from? From what you send me every month. I send it for you to use, and I used it on you. Alejandro didn't respond. Carmen looked at him with that expression he'd known since he was a child, the one she had when she'd made a decision, and there was no room for argument. But she said it with such tenderness that you couldn't get angry either. How old are you tomorrow? She asked. The day after tomorrow. 35. 35. She repeated the number as if measuring it. When you were 5, and I turned 30, you gave me a drawing, do you remember? No. A sun with crooked rays and all. And underneath you'd written, for my mom, who is the prettiest, with the B and N backward. A sound like a laugh escaped him. I saved it for 30 years. I still have it. Alejandro lowered his gaze to the table. Mom, don't say Mom with that face. He pointed at it with his finger. Nothing serious happened. I'm here. I'm fine. And I'm going to eat my chilaquiles. They pulled your arm. I've had worse things happen. That doesn't make it less serious. No, she admitted, but it doesn't make it the end of the world either. The waiter arrived with 2 glasses of water and a basket of totopos. Carmen took one and bit into it with the shameless pleasure of someone who has no time to waste on pretense. Alejandro waited for the young man to leave. I want to tell you something, he said. Tell me. When I was 12 and we were in the attic room in Colonia Guerrero, there was a week when we didn't eat well. Do you remember? Carmen chewed the totopo slowly. She said nothing. I noticed, Alejandro continued. You'd serve me a full plate and then say you'd already eaten, that you weren't hungry, that you'd had a big breakfast. But one night I woke up at 3 in the morning to get water, and I saw you sitting in the kitchen eating a piece of stale bread with salt. Carmen still said nothing. She looked at the basket of totopos. I never told you I saw you, Alejandro said. I went back to bed and pretended to be asleep. But that image has never left me, Mom. In 30 years, it hasn't left me. His voice didn't crack. Alejandro Villanueva wasn't one to cry in public, just like his mother, but there was something in his throat that wasn't exactly his normal voice. That was once, Carmen said softly. It was several times, and I was a child, and I couldn't do anything, and then I grew up, and I could do things, and I swore to myself that you would never go through something like that again. He paused. And today I walk into my own store, and my mother is being thrown out. My son, let me finish, she said it softly, without interrupting, just asking for space. I'm not angry with you. I could never be. I'm looking for the word. I'm grateful that you are, that you continue to be exactly who you are, after everything you've lived through. Because I know what you lived through. I know every single year, and I don't know how you managed it so I wouldn't feel it as a burden. That, Mom, that is something no amount of money in the world will ever let me pay back. Carmen looked at him for a long moment, then reached across the table and placed her fingers over his hand. She said nothing. It wasn't necessary. The waiter arrived with the chilaquiles, 2 deep bowls, generously covered in green salsa, with cream, cheese, red onion, and shredded chicken on top. The aroma filled the space between them, as if the conversation needed a breath. Carmen withdrew her hand and picked up her fork. "See," she said, looking at the plate. "Generously covered. That's how they're made." "That's how they're made," confirmed Alejandro. They ate in silence for a moment. A good silence, the kind that only exists between people who know each other so well they no longer need to fill it. "What are you going to do with the manager?" Carmen asked at last, without looking up from her plate. "Whatever I have to do. Don't fire him because of me. It wouldn't be because of you. He has a family, surely. Many people have families, Mom. That doesn't excuse what he did." Carmen sighed. "I'm just saying. Don't overreact. You've humiliated him enough already." Alejandro looked at her. "I humiliated him in front of everyone." "Yes," she said, without reproach. "Sometimes the lesson sinks in better when there's no audience." Alejandro chewed. He thought. He didn't answer immediately, which was his way of admitting she had a point. "I'm going to do what's fair," he said finally. "That's all I ask." They continued eating. Midway through their plates, Carmen spoke again. "Do you know what hurt me the most about it all?" "What?" "It wasn't that he told me to leave. It wasn't that he pulled me." She paused. "It was that the employees looked down. All of them. None of them said anything. And I knew they knew it was wrong. But no one said anything." Alejandro put his fork down on his plate. "I'll address that too. Don't blame them either. They're afraid of losing their jobs." Another sip of water. "That's how we are. Those of us who depend on someone. We learn not to see." Alejandro looked at her intently. "You never learned that." Carmen thought about it. "No," she admitted. "But I never cared that much about what I might lose." They finished the chilaquiles. The waiter brought the bill. Carmen took it before Alejandro could move. "I told you I was inviting. Mom, let me invite." She repeated it with the same firmness with which she had said everything else, and pulled the envelope from her purse. Alejandro let her pay, because it was the right thing to do, because it was her gift, because she had earned it with 4 months and 35 years, and with a stale piece of bread and salt at 3 in the morning, in an attic kitchen he had never been able to forget. And because he had learned over time that some things couldn't be argued with his mother, not out of weakness, but out of respect for a will that was stronger than any argument. What Alejandro didn't know, what no one had yet told him, was that the woman with the bracelets was named Graciela Montes. She was 68 years old, a retired teacher, and had a nephew who managed an Instagram news account with 400,000 followers. Graciela hadn't recorded anything. She wasn't that kind of person. But she had left the jewelry store with a heavy heart, and the scene was etched in her memory with the clarity of things that hurt, even if they don't happen to you. She had called her nephew from the car while waiting for the valet to bring her the keys, and had told him everything, word for word. The manager, the elbow, the bills on the floor, the navy blue suit. The phrase, "A woman like you has no business being in this place." The nephew published the story that same afternoon, written as a news report with the name of the jewelry store in the neighborhood. There were no photos, no videos, just words. But sometimes words are enough. By 11 p.m., the post had 47,000 interactions and had been shared 2,300 times. The comments were divided into 2 invisible columns: those who had experienced something similar, and there were many, and those who knew someone who had experienced it. And there were even more. A woman from Guadalajara wrote that the same thing had happened to her mother in a downtown boutique. A man from Monterrey recounted how his grandmother had been made to wait, standing for 40 minutes in a luxury pharmacy because she didn't look like she could afford it. A young woman from Oaxaca simply wrote, "This is how they treat us when we don't look rich." The next morning, 3 digital media outlets picked up the story. By the afternoon, 2 television stations had it, and that's when Alejandro's phone started ringing nonstop. He was in his 16th floor office when the first message from his head of communications arrived. "Boss, there's a situation on social media about elite jewelry. Are you aware?" Then the others arrived. Alejandro read the original post, read the comments, read the notes from the media outlets that had reconstructed the story, with astonishing fidelity to the details Graciela had provided. No note bore his name, none mentioned the owner, they only spoke of the manager, the elderly woman, the jewelry store. But it was enough for his legal and image teams to be in emergency mode. He called his head of communications. What do you recommend? That we issue a statement today? Express that the behavior described does not reflect the company's values. Announce a review of protocols, the crisis standard. Without mentioning that I was there. If we mention it, the story gets bigger. It might be convenient or not, depending on... The story is already big, Alejandro said. And the woman at the center of it all is my mother. Silence on the other end. Your mother was the lady in the jewelry store? Yes. A longer pause. Then we have to completely rethink the approach. That's what I thought. I'll call you back in an hour. He hung up. He remained seated in front of the window with Mexico City below and the phone in his hand, thinking. Corporate logic dictated a neutral statement. Distance. Damage control. Protecting the brand without exposing the owner. It was what any image consultant would have recommended without hesitation. But there was something that logic couldn't calculate. His mother had entered that store with 5,000 pesos in a folded envelope and had been thrown out in front of everyone. And 47,000 people had felt something upon reading it, not because they were fans of any brand, but because they recognized it, because it was a story they already knew, with different names and different stores and different cities, but the same underlying humiliation. Alejandro made a decision. He called his director back. We are not issuing a corporate statement. I will speak in person. Excuse me? Not a press release, not a public relations text. Me, Alejandro. That's a risk. I know. If you speak, the focus shifts completely. It's no longer the story of a woman and a manager. It's the story of the owner. All the scrutiny falls on you, on the company, on how you've handled this, also on what I did right. He paused. No. Silence. What did you do right? She asked cautiously. I was there. I saw what happened. I acted. And tomorrow, I'm going to do what's next. What is next? That I will announce myself, that night, from the official account of Grupo Villanueva Capital, not Elite's Jewelry, but the corporate group, the one followed by analysts and investors. Alejandro posted a video. 90 seconds. No written script, no teleprompter, no corporate background or visible logo. Just him sitting in front of a window in the same suit as the day before, because he hadn't gone home to change. He started like this. Yesterday, I walked into one of my stores and saw how they threw my mother out because they didn't like how she was dressed. I want to tell you what happened and what we're going to do. 90 seconds without crying, without hitting the table, without an inflammatory speech. Just facts told in the same calm voice with which he had spoken to Rodrigo that morning. He confirmed he was the owner of the chain. He confirmed he had witnessed the incident. He confirmed that a formal process had been initiated with the manager. And at the end, he said something that wasn't in any crisis communication manual. My mother came to that jewelry store with money she saved for 4 months to buy me a birthday gift. She was thrown out because her clothes weren't deemed sufficient. I want you to know, that woman sewed other people's clothes, sold food in the early morning, and worked tirelessly to raise me. She is the person I admire most in the world, and she deserved to be treated with respect, as anyone deserves to be treated, regardless of how they arrive dressed. 90 seconds. The next morning, the video had 3 million views. Not because Alejandro was famous. He wasn't. Beyond the financial world, not because he had said something true, but because he had said something true, unvarnished. And the people trained to detect the difference between the true and the fabricated felt it. The comments were different from the original post. There was no longer just outrage. There was something more complex. Recognition, emotion, and in many cases, personal stories. My mom too. That happened to my grandmother last year. Thank you for saying it, because we say it and no one listens. 3 national media journalists requested an interview that same day. Grupo Villanueva Capital's stock didn't drop. It rose by 1 2/10 of a point, which in the silent language of financial markets meant investors had calculated that transparency was worth more than scandal. But none of that mattered as much as the call Alejandro received at 9 a.m. Before the video, before the interviews, before any corporate repercussions, it was his mother. My son, they're calling me from the newspaper. What? If I want to give an interview, tell them what happened? A pause. What do I tell them? Alejandro closed his eyes for a second. What do you want to do? A brief silence. I don't want my story to be a spectacle, my son. Then it's not. And if by not speaking it seems like I'm afraid, it doesn't seem like anything. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Another silence. And you? Are you going to talk? I already spoke. When? Last night I posted a video. A long pause. without telling me. I didn't want you to worry, mijo. Her voice had that particular blend of tenderness and reprimand only mothers master. I'm 75 years old, not 15. I can find out things. I know, Mom. I'm sorry. What did you say in the video? The truth. Another silence. You mentioned me. Yes. How? Alejandro thought for a second how to summarize it. I said you're the person I admire most in the world. The line was silent for several seconds. When Carmen spoke again, her voice had something different. She wasn't crying. Carmen Villanueva wasn't crying on the phone, but there was something in her voice that was the contained adult version of what could have been a sob. You're so dramatic, she said and hung up. Alejandro stood with the phone in his hand, a nameless weight in his chest, but it felt like the kind of happiness that hurts a little from its sheer completeness. Valentina Guerrero Alcantara found out through her assistant, not because she wasn't following the news. She followed it obsessively, with 4 screens and 3 media monitoring apps, but because her assistant had been instructed to filter anything that could affect her agenda, and Alejandro Villanueva's name had been on that filter list for 2 years, since they last spoke. This morning, her assistant walked into her office on the 12th floor of the Santa Fe Tower and placed the phone on the desk without a word. She simply gestured to the screen. Valentina read the headline. Then she watched the video, all 90 seconds of it, without a pause. When it was over, she leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling for approximately 15 seconds. Then she told her assistant to cancel the 11 o'clock meeting and bring her a coffee. Valentina was 34 years old. She was a partner at a financial consulting firm with clients in 4 countries and possessed that kind of organized beauty that requires daily discipline. Dark hair, always impeccable, clothes from discreetly expensive brands, the posture of someone who has learned that first impressions are a manageable asset. She was intelligent, ambitious, and 6 years prior had made the most calculated and most wrong decision of her life. Alejandro Villanueva was 29 when she met him at an investment conference in Monterrey. He wasn't yet who he was now. He had a small company, a rented apartment, and that quiet confidence of someone who knows where they're going, even if they haven't arrived yet. They dated for a year and a half. She left him, not because she had stopped loving him, but because at the time, her calculations said he was a long-term project with an uncertain return, and she had other, more immediate options. What her calculations couldn't foresee was that in the next 4 years, he would build one of the country's most solid business groups. Valentina had followed him from afar. She knew exactly how much the group was worth, what acquisitions it had made, what direction it was taking. She had followed him with the cold, systematic attention of someone who would invent their own mistake without wanting to admit it as such. And now, with 3 million people watching a video where he spoke about his mother in a voice Valentina remembered very well, that calm, unadorned voice, which was his way of saying the things that mattered most to him, something shifted within her. It wasn't regret. Exactly. Valentina wasn't good at regret. It was something more pragmatic, an opening, a public story that had humanized him in front of millions, a moment when he was visible and vulnerable in a controlled way, an opportunity. That afternoon, she sent him a message. Alejandro, I saw the video. What you did for your mom is beautiful. I'm glad to know you're still you. How is she? She sent it from the number he had saved, which he hadn't blocked because Alejandro wasn't the type to block. He just kept things silent. The message remained in sent for 4 hours. Then the double blue checkmark appeared. But there was no reply. Valentina waited until night. Nothing. The next morning, nothing. She considered sending another message and discarded it. 2 unanswered messages were a response in themselves, and she knew it. So, she changed tactics. She called Marcos Fuentes, a financial journalist with whom she had a good relationship, and suggested, with the professional subtlety that characterized her, that a more complete profile of Alejandro Villanueva might be interesting, given his moment of public exposure. She could provide context. She knew the person from before. Marcos went to see her 2 days later. What Valentina didn't know, what no one had told her, was that Doña Carmen Villanueva watched the news every morning from 7 a.m. with a cinnamon coffee and the volume too high, because her right ear no longer responded as it used to. And that morning, on the local news channel she always watched, there had been a brief segment about Alejandro's video, which included, in the corner of the screen, Valentina Guerrero Alcantara's name as a source close to the businessman. Carmen turned off the television, picked up the phone, and called Alejandro. My son, Mom, good morning. How are you? Fine. Hey, do you know who Valentina Guerrero is? A very brief pause, the kind only someone who knows the person very well would notice. Yes, you're still in touch, aren't you? Sure, Mom. Why? Because they mentioned her on the news as a source close to you. Silence. On what channel? Channel 4. This morning. Alejandro said nothing for 2 seconds. Then, I see. Don't worry. I'm not worried, Carmen said. I'm just letting you know. Thanks, Mom. Hey, and something else? Tell me, did you love that girl? The question was direct, like everything her mother said, no beating around the bush, no pretense, without the diplomatic wrapping most people use to cover questions they truly want to ask. Alejandro hesitated. Yes, he said. In my time, and now. Not now. Carmen made that brief sound she made when processing information and reaching a conclusion she didn't need to voice. Well, she said, then there's nothing to talk about. Exactly. Take care, mijo. You too, Mom. She hung up. Alejandro stared at the phone. Then he opened the messaging app. He saw Valentina's message, which he had read the night before and hadn't responded to. He read it again. How is she? He thought of his mother picking up bills from the marble floor. He thought of hard bread with salt. He thought of the beige cardigan with the darned elbow. He thought of 4 months of savings in a folded envelope. He closed the app. He didn't respond. That same afternoon, his legal team informed him that the interview with Marcos Fuentes, published in a digital financial publication, included statements from a source who knew Alejandro Villanueva from his early days, describing the businessman as a person of solid values, very attached to his family, with whom he maintained a close friendship. Alejandro read the paragraph twice, then called his communications director. There's someone trying to insert themselves into my story. I want you to handle it. How strongly? Without confrontation. Just make it clear that the authorized sources to speak about me are me, no one else. Understood? And one more thing. Tell me. The inauguration conference for the Reforma branch is still on for Thursday. Yes, everything's ready. I want my mother to be there. A pause. As a guest. As the reason the event exists. Silence from the other end. Then, understood. Alejandro, I'll take care of it. He hung up. He leaned back in his chair, looking at the ceiling of his office on the 16th floor. Outside, Mexico City continued to be Mexico City. Enormous, noisy, indifferent, and passionate all at once. He thought of his mother watching the news at 7 a.m. with the volume too high and a cinnamon coffee. He thought that in 2 days, he would turn 35. He thought of the silver cufflinks, still in the jewelry store window, waiting. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled without anyone seeing him. Carmen Villanueva was not a woman of beauty salons, not because she couldn't afford them. Alejandro had offered her, with varying degrees of insistence, things far more expensive than a haircut, but because she was 75 years old and had learned long ago that personal presentation was a matter of self-respect, not audience. She styled her own hair, dressed herself, and had an ironing board by her bedroom window from which she could see the jacaranda that bloomed every February, as if it owed her something. That morning, Thursday, the day of the inauguration, she got up at 6, bathed, carefully styled her gray hair into her usual bun, but neater than usual. She took out the only dress she reserved for special occasions from the closet. A dark navy blue, simple fabric, but well cut, with small buttons down the front. It had been in that closet for 5 years. It fit her just the same as the first day. She looked in the mirror and thought she was fine. Alejandro arrived to pick her up at 10. He rang the doorbell, even though he had a key, because it was his way of respecting that this house was his mother's territory. Carmen opened the door and looked him up and down. Dark gray suit, white shirt, blue tie, black shoes, as impeccable as ever. Why are you wearing a blue tie if the suit is gray? She said by way of greeting. 'Cause it matches, Mom. Matches what? Everything. She looked him over again. It's fine. It was her way of saying he looked handsome, that he always had, and that she wouldn't say it directly, because it would inflate an ego that was already considerable. They went down to the car together. It was a black Mercedes, discreet by the standards of what Alejandro could afford. Chosen specifically because Carmen had stated on several occasions that overly ostentatious cars seemed in poor taste. The driver, Don Refugio, who had been with Alejandro for 7 years and had genuine respect for the lady, greeted her by taking off his cap. Good morning, Doña Carmen. It's a pleasure to see you. Good morning, Refugio. How is your wife? Better, thank God. Her pressure has gone down. That's good. Tell her I send a hug. With pleasure, ma'am. Alejandro observed the exchange from the adjacent seat, with that familiar feeling that his mother, in any context, in any place, always found the real person behind the role they occupied. Don Refugio wasn't just the driver to Carmen. He was the gentleman whose wife had high blood pressure. They crossed the city in silence for a while. You're going to tell me why you're taking me, Carmen finally asked, to the inauguration of the new elite jewelry branch on Reforma. I already know that. I asked you why you're taking me. Alejandro looked at her. Because I want you to be there. Why? Because. Carmen glanced at him sideways with that expression she had when she knew there was more, but decided not to push it yet. There will be a lot of people, some press, some investors, chain employees. It's not a massive event. I'll have to speak only if you want me to. I don't want you to. Then you won't speak. Carmen nodded. She looked out the window. Hey, my son, tell me, what happened with the manager? Alejandro paused for a second. The investigation ended yesterday. Miss Montoya gave me the report, and it wasn't the first time he'd acted like this. There were 3 previous documented complaints from employees in his file, 2 of them related to discriminatory treatment of clients. They had been shelved without follow-up. Carmen said nothing. He was fired yesterday. Alejandro continued. With the full severance pay he's entitled to by law, no deductions. What he did justifies the separation, but his years of work deserve to be recognized financially. That doesn't change. How did he take it? With dignity, they told me. He didn't protest. Carmen kept looking out the window. Good, she said finally. I hope he does well. Alejandro didn't respond. He knew she meant it. The new Reforma branch was unlike any other in the chain. Alejandro had designed it conceptually, not architecturally. For that, he had a team with a different premise. That exclusivity doesn't have to be hostility. That a jewelry store can be a place where anyone feels they have the right to enter. Large windows, natural light, soft music, and most importantly, without that museum display case atmosphere, where even looking at something feels like a crime. There was also a new policy announced internally 3 days prior. Any elite jewelry employee documented discriminating against a client based on their appearance, age, or socioeconomic status would receive immediate disciplinary action. No filing protocols, no delayed follow-up. They called it Protocol Carmen in the internal memo. Alejandro hadn't planned it that way. It had been his head of communications who suggested the name almost as a joke, and he had taken 3 seconds to say yes, that's what it would be called. They arrived at the branch at 11:15. There was a small crowd outside, journalists with cameras, some investors with their assistants, chain employees from all branches summoned for the event. When the black Mercedes stopped and Don Refugio opened the door, Alejandro got out first and then extended his hand to help his mother. Carmen got out slowly, carefully, adjusting her navy blue dress with that quiet dignity that needs no one to exist. There was a murmur, not of surprise. Exactly. People knew she would be there. The communications team had discreetly leaked it. It was more the recognition of seeing in person someone you've known through a story. The lady in the cardigan. The mother who picked up her bills from the marble floor without losing her composure. Now she was here in a navy blue dress, with a son offering her his arm. They entered together. The interior of the new branch smelled of new wood and flowers. There was a large arrangement of white carnations by the entrance, which Carmen regarded with silent approval, because carnations had always seemed more honest to her than orchids. Alejandro led her to the center of the sales floor, where there was a special display case, separate from the rest, lit differently. It wasn't the largest or the flashiest, it was the simplest. Inside, on a dark blue velvet cushion, lay a pair of silver cufflinks, plain, elegant, without excessive ornamentation, the same ones Carmen had gone to look for 4 days prior. She stopped in front of the display case, looked at them, then looked at Alejandro. My son, wait. Alejandro took the small key one of the employees handed him, opened the display case, and carefully retrieved the cufflinks. He held them in his palm in front of his mother. The ones you wanted to buy me, he said. The ones you came to get. Carmen looked at them. She looked at them for several seconds, as if verifying they were exactly as she remembered. They are those, she said. They are. A pause. But now, Alejandro said, I'll put them on, and you'll buy them, as you wanted, with your money from the envelope, as you had planned. Carmen looked at him. I no longer have the envelope here, my son. I know. Here it is. He pulled a folded white envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket and handed it to her. I brought it to you. Carmen opened the envelope. Inside were the same bills she had saved for 4 months. The same ones. She recognized them, though she couldn't explain how. The look she gave her son had no name in any language. It was something between astonishment and love, and pride and tenderness, all mixed together, all authentic. How much are they? She asked. 2,800. I'll take those cufflinks, please, she said to the employee standing nearby, with the same calm voice she had used to ask for the same cufflinks 4 days ago in another store. The employee, named Sophia, who had been with the company for 2 weeks and hadn't slept well since she learned what had happened in Lomas. She took the bills with both hands. With pleasure, madam. It's an honor to serve you. Carmen smiled at her. Alejandro bent down in front of her again. That gesture of his, to get down to her level, as if the world should adjust to his mother's height, not the other way around. And he offered her the cufflinks, already placed in the small blue velvet box. They're yours, Carmen said, for your birthday. Thank you, Mom. You like them. They're the best I've ever seen. Carmen looked at him with that expression. How you exaggerate. But she was smiling. Valentina Guerrero Alcantara arrived at the event uninvited. Just like that, with no prior announcement, no coordination with the communications team, without going through the filter of the attendee list that the head of communications for Grupo Villanueva had meticulously compiled over 3 days. She arrived because she read in a news portal that the inauguration was that Thursday in Reforma, and calculated with her peculiar logic that confused audacity with strategy, that physical presence at the right moment was worth more than any unanswered message. She had dressed with care, a cream linen suit, nude heels, her hair down but neat, the kind of outfit that says, I am professional, and I am attractive in the same sentence, without either canceling the other. She held a business card from her firm in her hand as if she were there on business. The entrance staff let her pass because she was well-dressed and spoke with confidence, which was exactly the type of filter protocol Carmen had come to question, even though it wasn't fully implemented yet. She entered and saw Alejandro immediately. It was hard not to see him. He was at the center of everything, and next to him, an older woman in a navy blue dress holding a velvet box as if it were something sacred. Valentina processed the scene, calculated the moment, and walked towards them with that studied confidence that was her second language. Alejandro. He turned. When he saw her, his expression didn't change. That was the problem from Valentina's perspective. He never let his face betray what he didn't want to say. It was the same calm of the man in the video, the man from the Lomas jewelry store, the man who had built a business empire, without anyone seeing exactly when he had crossed from promise to result. Valentina, he said, just her name, without inflection, without visible surprise, without the warmth she had expected, even if she wouldn't admit it to herself. It's good to see you, she said with a smile that was genuine in form and strategic in intent. I saw the video. What you did was very valuable. I wanted to tell you in person. You already told me by message, he replied. A small pause. The reminder that he had read and not responded. Valentina absorbed the blow without showing it. You're right. She turned to Carmen. And you must be Doña Carmen. It's an enormous pleasure to meet you. What happened to you was terrible, but the way you handled it was admirable. Carmen looked at her. She looked at her the same way she had looked at Rodrigo Salcedo 4 days prior, without haste, without visible hostility, with that quiet attention of someone who has all the time in the world and doesn't need any of the tricks people use to appear more than they are. Thank you, miss, Carmen said. What's your name? Valentina. Valentina Guerrero. I'm someone who knew Alejandro some years ago. Ah, Carmen nodded. And what do you do? Financial consulting. I have an office in Santa Fe. Good. She said it without emphasis, as a recorded and filed piece of information. And did you come to the event for work or to meet us? Valentina smiled. A bit of both, honestly. How honest, Carmen said. And there was neither irony nor warmth in her voice, just a statement of fact. Alejandro watched without intervening. He knew his mother well enough to know she didn't need help. Listen, Carmen said then, in the same calm voice, you're the girl who was in the news as a source close to my son. Valentina blinked. I gave some statements to a journalist, yes, but it was so your name would appear alongside his. Carmen completed, without accusation in her voice, just description. Silence. Valentina was intelligent, too intelligent to deny it in front of a woman who clearly didn't need proof to reach correct conclusions. Madam, I understand it might look that way. It looks that way because it is that way, isn't it? Carmen said, still without raising her voice. It's nothing, miss. You are free to talk to whomever you wish. I'm just telling you that my son doesn't need anyone to represent him. He represents himself. Very well, as you could see in the video. Of course, Valentina said. I wasn't trying to. And another thing, Carmen continued, as if Valentina hadn't spoken, but without rudeness, with that smooth continuity of someone who knows exactly what they want to say. My son turns 35 tomorrow. He has built everything he has with his own effort. He is a good person, he is hardworking, and he is loyal. She paused. Loyal people deserve loyal people by their side. Don't you think? The sentence had no explicit recipient. It didn't need to. Valentina held Carmen's gaze for a second. 2, 3? And in that moment, Valentina Guerrero Alcantara, who had survived complicated board meetings, difficult negotiations, and conversations where the subtext carried more weight than the text, felt for the first time in many years that she was completely out of her depth. Not because the old woman had attacked her, but precisely because she hadn't. You're right, madam, Valentina said, and this time there was no strategy in her voice. There was something that resembled honesty. You are completely right. Carmen nodded. Good, she said. I wish you very well, miss. And she turned back to the velvet box she was still holding, examining the cufflinks for the umpteenth time, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has finished something they started a long time ago. Valentina looked at Alejandro. He was looking at her with an expression she knew, although she hadn't seen it in 6 years, the one he had when he had made a decision, and there was nothing more to add. I wish you well, Valentina, he said. It was a farewell that was not aggressive, not cruel, just definitive. Valentina nodded once, put her business card back in her purse, turned around with the same composure with which she had arrived. She didn't lose that, and walked towards the exit among the groups of people chatting, unaware of what had just happened in that small 3-meter space. She watched him go. Then he turned to his mother, who was still admiring the cufflinks. That's what I think it was, he asked softly. I don't know what you're talking about, Carmen replied without looking up. Mom, what? You put her in her place without saying anything bad. Carmen finally lifted her gaze, looking at him with that expression. I just talked to her, she said. She's a smart girl. She understood on her own. Alejandro looked at her for a second. Do you know you're terrifying sometimes? What things you say? He adjusted the collar of her shirt, which didn't need adjusting. Go on. Go say hello to your people. That's why we're here. Alejandro left. Carmen remained by the sideboard, the small box in her hands, and within seconds, she was talking to Sophia, the new employee, asking her where she was from and if she liked her job, with her usual ease of making anyone feel like the most important person in the room. Sophia replied that she was from Hidalgo, that she liked the job very much, and that she was very nervous that day. We're all nervous the first few days, Carmen said. It passes. Do you get nervous too, ma'am? Carmen thought about it. Yes, but I learned that nerves and courage are the same thing. It depends on what you call them. Sophia looked at her with an expression that, in another context, would have been something very close to admiration. That's very beautiful, ma'am. It's the truth, Carmen said. Beautiful things almost always are. At 12:30, with the event already an hour and a half underway, and most of the journalists having taken their photos and collected their statements, Alejandro asked for attention. He didn't use a microphone. There was no stage, no backdrop screen with logos, and no prepared presentation. He simply stepped onto a small platform by the back wall where everyone could see him and waited for the chatter to die down naturally, the way men who know how to speak command attention without forcing it. It took 15 seconds. Then the room fell silent. Thank you for being here, he said. I'll be brief, because I know you have other places to be. Someone chuckled. The atmosphere softened a degree. This branch is different from the others in the chain, not just in design, but in intention. It was built with the idea that a jewelry store, or any establishment for that matter, should be a place where anyone feels they have the right to enter, regardless of how they're dressed, regardless of their age, regardless of what they carry in their bag. No one spoke. This week, I learned something that I actually already knew, but that life needed to remind me of firsthand. I paused, realizing that a person's worth isn't measured by their appearance, that dignity has no dress code, and that sometimes the people who have given the most in life are exactly the ones who show it the least on the outside. He looked for his mother. She was by the side wall, the velvet box in her hands, looking at him with that expression of hers that was impossible to decipher completely, yet completely legible to him. This chain has a new internal policy, he continued. It's called the Carmen Protocol. It establishes that the treatment of any client, regardless of their circumstances, is the absolute priority of every branch. And it bears that name because it was a woman named Carmen who taught me, not this week but throughout my life, that respect is not a courtesy, it's an obligation. Absolute silence. Alejandro stepped down from the platform and walked toward his mother. She watched him approach with her usual composure, her lips pressed into a straight line, which was her way of containing what she didn't want to let slip. Alejandro stopped in front of her. "There's one more thing," he said in a low voice but audible to those nearby. "My son, he's waiting." He gave a discreet signal toward the back. 2 employees moved. They uncovered something that had been draped with a black cloth near the main entrance. A rectangular brushed metal plaque fixed to the wall at eye level. On the plaque, in clean, unadorned letters, it read, "Joyeria Carmen, Reforma Branch, in honor of Carmen Villanueva, who taught us that dignity has no dress code." Carmen looked at it, read it once, read it twice. No one spoke. Alejandro watched her. Everyone watched her, though they tried not to do so, obviously, because there are moments that demand a certain intimacy, even when they happen in public. Carmen Villanueva was 75 years old. She had buried a husband. She had raised a son alone. She had washed other people's clothes, cooked in the early morning, sold food on the street in the cold and the heat. She had gone through weeks of hard bread and salt without complaining to anyone. She had picked up bills from the marble floor without losing her composure. She had forgiven before being asked for forgiveness. She had paid for her chilaquiles with her own money, even though her son was a millionaire, and she had dismissed a calculating woman with 3 calm sentences, without raising her voice, and now there was a plaque with her name on the wall of a jewelry store in Reforma. She didn't cry. Carmen Villanueva didn't cry in public, but her lips trembled, just for a second, just one, and then she pressed them together again and controlled them, which was what she had always done with the things that hurt her the most or moved her the most. Press them, breathe, and continue. She turned to Alejandro. "You're crazy," she said, her voice a little lower than usual. "Maybe. Why did you put my name there?" "So it's where it belongs. People will ask who I am." "They already know who you are." Carmen looked at him. "My son." Her voice was firm, but there was something behind it that wasn't firmness. "I didn't do anything special. I just lived like anyone else." "Not like anyone else, Mom." "Yes, like anyone else." She pointed with her finger. "There are millions of women who did the same as me, or more, who work, who take care of their children, who endure things they shouldn't have to, and who have no one to put up a plaque for them. I'm not special." Alejandro looked at her for a moment. "You're right," he said. "You're not special. You're extraordinary, and there's a difference." Carmen opened her mouth to reply. She closed it, opened her mouth again, closed it again, and then did something no one in that room expected. She laughed. Not a big laugh, a brief, almost involuntary chuckle, the kind that escapes when something takes you by surprise. And it's so accurate that you can do nothing but surrender to it. "What things you say," she murmured. Alejandro smiled, crouched in front of her for the 3rd time that week, for the 100th time in his life, and hugged her, not ceremoniously, not for the cameras, just hugged her with his full arms, like a son hugs his mother when he has learned that time is finite and that there are hugs that cannot be postponed. Carmen placed a hand on his back and gave him 3 soft pats, which was her way of saying, "I'm here, I'm okay, I love you, now let go of all of it in the same gesture." He let her go. The employees applauded. First one, then all of them. A genuine applause, without obligation, the kind that arises only when something true has happened, in a place, and the people who witnessed it don't know what else to do with what they're feeling. The remaining journalists took photos. Carmen looked at them with an expression of gentle resignation. "Enough, enough," she said, waving her hand. "Don't make that face. I'm an old lady, not a monument." More laughter. The atmosphere broke into conversations, into movement, into the normal texture of an event that had reached its peak and was now descending toward the natural end of things. Alejandro stayed by her side. "How do you feel?" he asked her softly. Carmen thought about the answer seriously, as if it were a question that deserved real consideration. "Good," she said at last. "A little silly, but good." "Silly? Why?" "Because I almost cried. And I don't cry. Almost doesn't count. It counts for me." Alejandro smiled. "Are you hungry?" Carmen looked at him. "I'm always hungry." "Chilaquiles again, or what do you want?" Carmen thought. "Pozole, green, well-loaded. There's a place nearby. With tostadas." "With tostadas. Okay." She took a step forward, the velvet box under her arm, and that straight posture she hadn't lost in 75 years. "But I'm treating, Mom. I'm treating my son." She said it without turning around, walking straight ahead. "Don't argue." Alejandro followed her. Don Refugio was waiting outside, with the engine running and the door open. As Carmen passed him, she placed her hand on his arm for a second. "Hey, Refugio, would you like some pozole?" The chauffeur looked at her, surprised. "Ma'am, I came with you," Carmen said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I'm not asking if you can. I'm asking if you want to." Don Refugio looked at Alejandro. Alejandro raised his hands in a gesture that said, "I'm not getting involved." "With pleasure, Doña Carmen," said the chauffeur, with a smile that hadn't come so freely in years. "Good." Carmen opened the rear door herself and got in. "Then let's go. I'm hungry." Alejandro got in behind her. The door closed. The black Mercedes sped down Reforma with the midday sun outside, and that plaque inside the jewelry store where the letters bore her name, and with a 75-year-old woman traveling with a small box of silver cufflinks under her arm and the exact money for pozole already counted in her purse. Because that was Carmen Villanueva. Always ready, always prepared, always herself. Exactly. Herself from the first day to the very last.